The kind of morning where the clouds hang low and nothing feels warm, not even the coffee they serve in the funeral home side room. He was my partner for 43 years. A contractor by trade, quiet but respected, always in motion. He built things. Bridges, schools, libraries, anything that needed structure, he could make it stand. Until his own body began to crumble from the inside out. Now he lay in a closed casket at the front of the room, dressed in his navy suit, while our children whispered near the exit like they were late for something more important. Andrea, our daughter, was the first to speak to me after the service, not to ask how I was, not to check if I'd eaten, but to say, "We need to talk about the house." Her voice was flat, efficient. She'd always been more like Henry than me, sharp, impatient, focused. Beside her stood Victor, our eldest, flanked by his wife Chelsea, who wore grief like it was an accessory she wasn't sure matched. The lawyer called. Victor said, no softness in his tone. "The reading is scheduled for Thursday." I nodded. The word felt foreign in my mouth. Thursday, as if I hadn't buried my husband an hour ago. "We assume you'll want to sell," Chelsea added with a smile too sweet to be sincere. "It's such a large house for one person, and with your situation." My situation. That's what they called it now. I kept my voice even. "The house isn't going anywhere, not yet." Andrea frowned. "Mom, you haven't worked in decades. Dad took care of everything. Finances, the bills, even the grocery apps. You don't even know how to transfer money online." She wasn't wrong. Henry had insisted on managing it all. "You make the home warm, Clara. I'll handle the rest." And I had. For 43 years. But something inside me shifted that day, something I didn't have words for yet. Only a quiet knowing that I was not, in fact, finished. That night, the house felt too quiet. The kind of silence that presses in on your chest and makes you forget what breathing is supposed to feel like. I wandered from room to room, unsure what I was looking for. The coffee mug Henry had left in the sink still had a faint ring inside. His glasses were folded neatly next to the newspaper, open to the obituaries, as if he'd been checking to see if his name had appeared yet. I found myself in the upstairs hallway, standing in front of the linen closet. Inside, everything looked untouched: extra towels, spare pillows, a box of holiday decorations we never put up anymore. My fingers brushed along the top shelf, searching for the little tin where Henry kept backup keys. Garage, shed, safety deposit box. And then one I didn't recognize. A small brass key. Smooth, cool, and oddly clean for something tucked away in the dark. I looked up. The attic access panel was above me, just a flat square in the ceiling I had walked under for years without a second glance. But now I noticed something different, a faint crack around the edges like it had been opened and resealed. Henry always told me not to go up there. Too dangerous, sweetheart. Tools everywhere. Dust thick as your fist. But I wasn't afraid of dust. I went to the garage and dragged out the telescoping ladder. My hands trembled slightly as I extended it, the metal cold and unfamiliar. I climbed slowly, the brass key clutched tightly in my palm like a secret trying to get out. The key turned smoothly. The panel creaked open on well-oiled hinges, and what I saw made me grip the sides of the ladder until my knuckles turned white. No dust, no clutter, no forgotten Christmas lights or rusty nails. Instead, the space looked intentional, pristine, tables with blueprints neatly rolled, file cabinets labeled in Henry's handwriting, a drafting lamp, clean floors, organized drawers. This wasn't storage. This wasn't an attic. This was a hidden office. A place Henry had built not just to hide things but to build something he never told anyone about. Not even me. I climbed all the way up and stepped onto the attic floor, half expecting it to collapse beneath me. But it didn't. It held. Just like Henry always had. The blueprints were the first thing I noticed, lined up in tubes, labeled in his blocky handwriting. I unrolled the top one carefully, and as the paper flattened across the table I felt my breath catch. Sunrise Academy for Girls. A school. 3 stories tall, dormitories on either side, a central courtyard. Notes in the margins, library on 2nd floor. Natural light for art therapy, soundproof counseling offices. I traced the ink with my fingertips like it might still be warm from his hand. The next blueprint was labeled Haven House, transitional housing for women and children, private family units, communal kitchen, a playground, panic buttons in every room. Then came another. Golden Grove Senior Community, not institutional, not sterile. Green spaces. Garden plots. Workshop rooms. A communal dining hall for those who wanted connection but didn't want to feel managed. Each plan more detailed than the last. Each note written in the same familiar hand. In the back of the room sat a file cabinet. I opened it, and inside were folders labeled with terrifying precision: zoning research, grant opportunities, outreach contacts, building codes. And then one marked medical. I pulled it out, sat down slowly, and began to read. Stage I lung cancer. Diagnosis 3 years ago. But he'd only told me 2. For 12 months Henry carried this alone, and while I thought he was tinkering in the garden or napping in the den, he was up here drawing, writing, planning. There was one more folder. It was thinner than the rest, labeled in pen legacy. Inside I found a letter addressed to me. Clara. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry for that. I didn't tell you about the cancer right away because I couldn't stand the thought of watching you lose hope. You've always been the heart of this house, and I wanted to protect that light in you as long as I could. These buildings, they're more than sketches. They're what I should have built long ago. I spent decades constructing office parks and government centers, but I always dreamed of building something that mattered. I know I won't live to see these rise, but I had to try. I'm not asking you to carry this weight, Clara, but if you're holding this letter, then maybe you're the only person I trust to decide what happens next. With all my love. Henry. I sat there a long time, long enough for the light to fade from the narrow attic window and the cold to find my bones. But I didn't feel lost. I felt needed. For the first time in years. The next morning I brewed my coffee in Henry's old mug and carried it to the kitchen table, where his laptop sat untouched. I had never opened it while he was alive. It felt like crossing a line. But now I needed to know what else he left behind. The password was easy. My middle name followed by our wedding anniversary. Even in his secrets he included me. His browser was a map of quiet ambition research on nonprofit housing models, educational grants, architectural trends for trauma-informed spaces, articles about shelters that didn't feel like punishment, schools that didn't look like institutions. He'd bookmarked success stories, case studies, crowdfunding platforms, names I didn't recognize but could now follow. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then I opened Facebook. I hadn't posted in years. My page was still a photo of our dog who died long before Henry, but the post I wrote that day was clear, honest, and more vulnerable than anything I'd shared publicly in decades. 3 days ago, I buried my husband of 43 years. Today I found blueprints in our attic schools, shelters, community homes, all drawn by his hand, all unrealized. Henry Whitmore wasn't just a builder of buildings, he dreamed of building hope. He didn't live to see them come to life, but maybe someone else will. I attached 2 photos, one of Sunrise Academy's blueprint and one of Haven House. I cropped them so our address wouldn't show, then I hit post before I could talk myself out of it. I didn't expect much. But within the hour, comments started rolling in, old neighbors, former colleagues, friends I hadn't spoken to in years. They shared the post, tagged people, wrote things like "This is exactly what we need more of and I'd volunteer in a heartbeat." But it was a message in my inbox that changed everything. Hi Mrs. Whitmore. My name is Savannah Lane. I run the North Haven Foundation, a nonprofit that supports visionary community projects. I saw your post. Would you be open to a conversation? I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed, yes, I'd like that very much. The meeting at the lawyer's office felt more like a tribunal than a family gathering. We sat at a long mahogany table under the gaze of oil paintings and diplomas, everything designed to make a person feel small, unless they wore a suit. David Greer, Henry's attorney for over 20 years, greeted me with the careful sympathy men reserve for widows they assume are fragile. I wasn't sure if I looked fragile, but I didn't feel that way anymore. Andrea and Victor arrived together, Chelsea trailing just behind. They positioned themselves around me like bookends, polite but firm. They had come prepared. David began reading Henry's will. The house, investments, and life insurance were all left to me directly. No conditions. But then came a second document. A letter from Henry, David said, outlining his wishes for your future housing. He slid it across the table. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Clara should consider downsizing within 2 years. The house is large and aging. Cypress Pines or similar community would offer her social support and reduce the burden of maintenance. Andrea sat back with a satisfied smile. Dad was practical. He wanted you somewhere safe and manageable. I nodded slowly. Yes, Henry was practical, and he was also idealistic. They looked confused. I opened my purse and placed the file folder on the table. Then, calmly, I began to speak. 3 years ago, your father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. For 1 year, he didn't tell anyone, not even me. But he didn't waste that time. I laid out the blueprints: Sunrise Academy, Haven House, Golden Grove. These are his. He designed them in the attic. Detailed, funded, researched. He didn't tell us because he didn't want to burden us with hope. But these were his real dreams. Victor blinked. What are you saying? I'm saying, I answered, that I intend to make them real. Chelsea laughed. You're talking about funding construction projects? Mom, you've never even paid a utility bill? David cleared his throat. Clara is the sole beneficiary of Henry's accounts. The funds are hers to manage. There are no legal restrictions. Victor's tone sharpened. So you're going to drain everything to chase Dad's pipe dreams? I met his eyes. Your father didn't dream in smoke. He drew in ink. He planned for permits, for zoning laws, for ADA compliance. He knew exactly what he was doing. Andrea folded her arms. You're not thinking clearly. You're grieving. This isn't the time to make life-altering financial decisions. I'm not grieving anymore, I said quietly. I'm choosing. There's a difference. Victor leaned forward, jaw tight. So what you're going to what? Build a school? Yes, I replied. That's exactly what I'm going to do. The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was disbelief. And it was the moment they realized that the woman they thought they could manage had made up her mind. 2 days after the lawyers' meeting, I transferred the first $50,000 from the investment account Henry left me. Architectural consultations, legal filings, soil surveys. The foundation's project manager, Savannah Lane, sent me a checklist that spanned 5 pages. I read every line twice, then once more, just to be sure. I turned my dining room into a project hub. Blueprints on the table, zoning regulations taped to the fridge. My kitchen calendar now tracked permit deadlines, not doctor's appointments. Andrea called that evening. Mom, I heard what you're doing. I stayed quiet. Victor and I were concerned. You're making impulsive decisions, spending money fast, with strangers. I took a breath. Savannah Lane is not a stranger. She runs a national nonprofit and has built over a dozen community projects in 3 states. She believes in your father's vision. Andrea's voice dropped an octave. Mom, please don't do something irreversible. That was the word, wasn't it? Irreversible. As if all my choices before had been safe, cautious, reversible, like my life had always been a temporary holding pattern waiting for someone else to approve the next move. I spoke softly. The only irreversible mistake would be pretending your father's last years meant nothing. The next day, Savannah arrived with her team and a professional media consultant. They wanted to film a short video explaining the project's origin. A local station had reached out after seeing my viral Facebook post. I hesitated at first. What if I say the wrong thing? I asked. Savannah smiled. You say the truth. That's more than enough. The interview took place in my backyard, under the willow tree Henry had planted our first spring in the house. As the cameras rolled, I spoke not as a widow or a retiree or someone being helped, but as a woman with a mission. I wasn't just building structures. I was rebuilding myself. That night, I got a message from Victor. We need to talk. Andrea mentioned your interview. Please don't do anything else until we've had a chance to meet again. This is getting out of hand. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I shut off my phone, closed my laptop, and opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, Sunrise Academy, Paisley 1 timeline. Then I picked up my pen and kept going. 6 months later, I stood in the gravel courtyard of a half-finished campus. 3 buildings framed a quiet circle where saplings had just been planted. Steel bones, fresh paint, glass panes still smudged with fingerprints of hope. Sunrise Academy was no longer a drawing in the attic, it was real. A local news crew set up their cameras under the morning sun. Savannah straightened my collar and handed me a small mic. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. More than I thought I'd be. Behind the cameras, I spotted Victor's silver SUV pulling up. Andrea stepped out, dressed in the same black coat she'd worn to Henry's funeral. Her expression was unreadable. Chelsea didn't come. They stood a few yards back, far enough not to interrupt but close enough to be seen, close enough to be counted. The reporter began, "Mrs. Whitmore, what would you say to those who doubted your ability to carry out this project?" I looked straight into the lens. I was told I was too old, too inexperienced, that my grief made me irrational, but what I've learned is that people confuse silence with weakness. I spent 43 years supporting a man who quietly built the world around us. When I discovered what he left behind, I decided I wouldn't be quiet anymore. Pause. Breathe. In the last 6 months, I've overseen zoning applications, contractor negotiations, community outreach, and funding acquisition. I've raised over $200,000 in additional donations. And next fall, this school will open its doors to girls who deserve safety, education, and a future. The camera shut off. Applause came from the crew, the volunteers, the construction workers leaning on their tools. I turned. Andrea and Victor were still there. Andrea stepped forward. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "It's beautiful, Mom." Victor looked around, blinking. He would have been proud. "Dad." I nodded. Yes, he would have been. Andrea hesitated. "I don't know how to undo what we said, what we assumed." "You don't have to undo it," I replied. "You just have to stop repeating it." She looked at the building again. "If you'll let me, I'd like to help with the next one. The women's shelter." I studied her face, still guarded, still proud. But also maybe for the first time in years, open. "Then help," I said. "Not as my daughter, but as someone who finally understands what this means." She nodded. "I'm ready to try." And just like that, for the first time in a very long time, I believed her. The first day of school arrived on a crisp November morning. I stood in the courtyard as 25 girls stepped nervously through the main doors of Sunrise Academy, backpacks slung over shoulders, laughter echoing under the tall windows Henry had designed for natural light. They didn't know me. They didn't know Henry. But they were walking through a door that only existed because he dared to dream, and because I refused to let that dream die. For a long time, I thought building something meant putting up walls. Now I know it means tearing them down. The ones others place around your voice, your worth, your possibilities. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. I didn't destroy anything. I simply claimed what was already mine, purpose, voice, and the right to decide what I do with the life I still have. If you're watching this and you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly dismissed, don't wait for someone to give you permission. Start building. And when you do, tag us in your story. Like, share, comment below because there's a whole